Wyoming Territory. 1883. The wind slid down from the hills like a warning, dry and sharp, tugging at the hem of Tessa Klein's faded skirt as she strained to lift the heavy wooden bucket from the narrow creek that cut through the dust-colored earth. Her arms shook, the water sloshed, and the handle bit into her fingers, but she did not stop. There was no one else to do it. She had been alone for 3 years now, since the fever took her father and the last of the hired hands drifted off when the money ran dry. The land was still hers, the little cabin still standing, but it was hard living, and harder still without anyone to lean on. Her mother had died when she was 12. Since then, it had been Tessa and the land and the long, quiet days. The sun was brutal already, high over the ridge, and she had 2 more rows of potatoes to water before noon. She gritted her teeth and bent her knees to lift the bucket better. "Let me get that for you." The voice came from behind her, low and steady. Tessa turned fast, heart thudding. A man stood a few paces away, tall and broad-shouldered, a dust-stained brim casting shadow over his eyes. He wore a trail-worn shirt, dark jeans tucked into scuffed boots, and a revolver holstered at his side. His horse, a dapple gray gelding, stood tethered to a nearby cottonwood. "I do not need help," she said quickly, throat dry. The man stepped forward anyway, slow and sure, and took the bucket from her hands without waiting for permission. His fingers brushed hers rough, warm. "You do not have to strain like that," he said. "Not while I am here." She stared at him, unsure whether to be angry or grateful. "Who are you?" He set the bucket down gently and offered a nod. "Silas Langley, rode in from the South Trail, looking for work, maybe a place to put my back into something honest." Tessa narrowed her eyes. "You think I have work to offer?" He gave the smallest shrug. "Saw the fence half down by the north pasture. Gates hanging off, too. Place like this does not keep itself. I figured maybe you could use hands more than you want to admit." She crossed her arms. She wanted to argue. But the truth was plain. The fence was falling apart and the roof leaked when it rained and the well was running low. She needed help. She just hated needing it. "I do not pay much," she finally muttered. "And not in coin. I have eggs, flour, some beans left." "I have eaten worse," he said. "And I have slept under worse roofs." He did not smile, not really, but there was something easy in his voice, not pushy, just real. She hesitated 1 second longer, then nodded. "Fine. You can sleep in the barn. Feed's low, so do not expect oats for your horse every morning." "Understood," he said. They walked back to the cabin in silence, Silas carrying the bucket as if it weighed nothing. Tessa watched the way he moved, quiet, like a man used to being alone, but not in a lonely way, in a calm way. And that made her chest ache more than she expected. Over the next few days, Silas worked like he had always belonged there. He fixed the gate without asking, trimmed the overgrown branches by the east fence, and dug a new trench from the creek to the garden rows. He never asked questions, never pushed, but he always showed up when she needed something lifted or carried. One morning, she stepped out with a basket of laundry and found him repairing the porch step she had been avoiding for months. "You do not have to do all that," she said, arms full of linen. He looked up. "I know." She paused, the sun warming her hair. "Why are you doing it then?" He straightened, wiping his hands on a worn cloth. "Because you should not have to do everything alone." Her breath caught. No one had said that to her before, not since her father died. Not even then, really. Later that afternoon, she stood by the creek again, another bucket in hand. When she bent down, Silas was there, out of nowhere, taking it from her. "I told you," he said, steady as ever. "You are not straining again while I am around." She laughed softly, surprised by the sound of it. "You really mean that, do you?" He looked at her, full on this time. His eyes were a warm brown, steady and sure. "I do." For a long moment they just stood there by the water, the breeze tugging at her braid, his fingers wrapped around the bucket handle. Something shifted between them, not fast but firm, real. "You always this stubborn?" she asked, trying to keep the heat out of her cheeks. He nodded once. "Only when it matters." That night, she made stew with the last of the potatoes, and they ate by lamplight on the porch. The sky stretched wide and dark above them, stars crowding close. "Why did you come here?" she asked after a while. Silas leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "I was tired of drifting, tired of sleeping with one eye open. I wanted to find something steady, maybe someone who needed a man who knows how to fix things." She glanced at him, her heart thudding slow and heavy. "You think I need fixing?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. I think you are the strongest person I have ever met. I just think you deserve someone who will carry the heavy things so you do not have to keep doing it alone." Tessa looked away, blinking fast. No one had ever said that to her. And something in the way he said, it made her feel like she could finally exhale. Like maybe she could stop fighting the world all by herself. She did not answer, not with words. But later, when he stood to go back to the barn, she reached out gently and touched his arm. "Stay," she said, voice soft. "Just stay a little longer." And he did. The morning after she asked him to stay, Tessa woke before the sun, drawn from sleep by the scent of coffee and the sound of a knife meeting wood in a slow, steady rhythm. She stepped into the main room barefoot, her hair loose down her back, and found Silas at the table slicing dried apples into thin strips. "You found the tin," she said, voice still rough with sleep. He glanced up, hand pausing mid-cut. "Wasn't hard. You organize your shelves like someone who doesn't like wasting time." She leaned against the doorframe, watching him. "Most days, I don't have the time to waste." He nodded, not arguing. "There's still biscuits left from last night. I thought maybe I'd stew the apples, make 'em soft enough to go over the top." She blinked, surprised. "You cook?" He didn't look up this time. "Enough to keep myself fed. I worked a chuck wagon for a few months once. Learned fast that bad food makes hard days harder." She crossed the room and reached for the kettle without asking. "You worked cattle, drove them from Texas up through Kansas. Dust in your teeth, thunder in your bones every time the herd moved, paid decent. But I never liked the noise of it." He set the knife down and stepped back as she poured water for the coffee. His hands were stained with apple flesh, and she noticed he moved slower this morning, like sleep hadn't come easy. "Did you rest?" she asked. He shrugged once. "Barn roof's got a gap. Wind got in," she frowned. "I should have warned you, it's all right. Sky was clear, I don't mind stars." He paused, then added, "But I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't trade them for a dry blanket one of these nights." She met his gaze. "You could move inside. There's a cot in the storeroom." "I don't use it." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the apples, scooping them into the pot without a word. When she moved past him to stir the fire, he said, "Wouldn't want to overstep. You wouldn't be." His fingers brushed the edge of the table. "Then I'd be grateful." The morning passed with quiet purpose. Silas repaired the broken hinge on the woodshed door while Tessa gathered the last of the corn from the far rows. Around midday, she walked back to the cabin and found him sitting on the porch, whittling a length of pine into narrow curls that fell like feathers into the dust. "What are you making?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Not sure yet. Sometimes I just carve to keep my hands steady." She sat beside him, wiping her palms on her apron. "You always need something to do," he nodded once. "Idle hands get loud thoughts." She considered that, then asked, "What kind of thoughts?" He turned the wood in his hand, eyes fixed on the shape forming beneath his knife. "About the men I rode with, about the ones I didn't stop soon enough." Her breath caught. She didn't ask more. He didn't offer. Instead, she said, I used to think if I worked hard enough, I wouldn't feel anything, but feelings don't wear out the way boots do, he nodded slowly. They don't. They sat in silence after that, the kind that didn't press or prod. When the sun crept lower and the light turned gold, she stood. I could use help hauling firewood, she said. He rose without question. Lead the way. They worked until the sky turned to embers. Each time she bent to lift a log, he was already reaching for the one beside it. They didn't speak, but something passed between them, an ease that hadn't been there before, a rhythm that didn't need words. When they finished, she turned to him. Thank you. He met her eyes. You don't need to thank me for doing right. She hesitated, then asked, Where were you before this? He took a breath, slow and measured. A mining camp outside of Medicine Bow. Place was bad with drink and worse with tempers. I left after a man pulled a knife over a card game. Didn't want to find out if he'd use it. You get in the middle of it. He shook his head. No, but it made me realize I'd been sleeping among men I didn't trust. Figured it was time to go. She studied him, the way he stood with his weight balanced like someone who didn't like being caught off guard. You ever think about settling somewhere for good? He looked out toward the hills, the last light touching the tops of the grass. I think about it now. She didn't say anything, just felt her heart shift in her chest like the first break in thawing ice. That evening he moved the cot into the storeroom without fuss. She left the door open between the two rooms. Neither of them spoke about it. They didn't need to. The first snow came early that year. Tessa stood at the edge of the field, arms wrapped tight around herself, watching the gray sky drop its silence over the hills. The flakes clung to her lashes and melted on her skin, soft as breath. The corn stalks were gone now, pulled and burned, leaving the land stripped bare. Behind her, the cabin chimney sent a thin ribbon of smoke into the air, and from inside she could hear the low thump of Sela's splitting kindling. He'd taken to preparing the hearth before first light, always awake, always moving. She never heard his footsteps until he was already there. She turned back toward the cabin, snow crunching beneath her boots, and stepped inside just as Sela's dropped another log near the fire. You'll need more than that when it turns to night, she said, brushing off her shawl. He nodded, gaze drifting to the window. Sky's heavy. Might stick through the week. She set a tin of salt near the stove. The preserves in the cellar'll hold if we ration right. I've cured the last of the meat. Sela's leaned against the far wall, arms folded. You ever thought about building a smokehouse? Even a small one, stretch your supplies come spring. I thought about it, she said. Didn't have the means. Well, you've got 2 hands more than you used to. He met her eyes. We could frame it before the ground freezes. You planning to stay that long? I am if you'll have me. She didn't answer right away. She moved to the stove instead, stirred the pot of beans warming there. The spoon scraped soft against the iron. You ever build one before? She asked. Twice. Once on a line camp. Once behind a church in Nebraska. Their preacher raised hogs. She turned slowly. You worked for a preacher. Helped him dig graves too. He buried folks whether they paid or not. Sela shrugged. Said the Lord didn't charge for rest. Tessa let out a short breath, not quite laughter but close enough. Sounds like a man who knew what mattered. He reminded me of your father. Sela's voice softened, words careful. Not in face, in the way he moved, slow but certain. She froze. You didn't know my father. I didn't, he agreed. But I've seen the kind of work he left behind. This land. You? She looked at him for a long time, something quiet passing through her. Then she stepped away from the stove and pulled open the cabinet beside the door. I've got a saw blade. Dull, but it'll take if you oil it. I'll get started after dinner. They ate beside the fire that night, knees almost touching beneath the table. The room felt smaller with the wind outside, but not in a way that pressed. It felt held. When the storm broke full and darkness swallowed the hills, Silas lit the lamp and took to sharpening the tools by the firelight. Tessa sat nearby, mending a tear in one of her father's old coats. 10 minutes passed, then 20, the only sound the rasp of stone on steel and the crackle of the stove. "You always this quiet?" she asked without lifting her eyes. "Only when I'm content." She tied off her thread. "You didn't say much when you first arrived. I didn't know if I'd be welcome. You think you are now?" "I do." She set the coat aside. "You'd be right." He looked up, the lantern casting his face in half-shadow. "That mean I can stay through winter?" "I was hoping you would." Silas didn't answer with words. Instead, he set the blade down, crossed the room, and crouched beside her chair. His hand rested on the fabric she'd just finished stitching. "You fixed this for me," he said. "No," she replied. "I fixed it for us." The room went still, the kind of still that asked nothing, demanded nothing, just waited, slowly, as if anything faster might break the moment. He reached for her hand. She let him. Tessa's hand wasn't soft, not with the work it had known, but he held it like it was something worth revering. "You ever been in love?" she asked. He didn't look away. "I've carried a lot of things, regret, guilt, hope, but never that," she swallowed. "Me neither." "Then maybe we learn together," she nodded once. "Maybe." That night he didn't return to the storeroom. The cot stayed made, untouched. She left the door to her room open wide, nothing rushed, nothing certain. But between them lay the first warmth of trust, steady as the fire burning low in the hearth. By mid-November, the ground had hardened underfoot, and the sun, when it showed at all, floated low and pale above the hills. The smokehouse rose slow but sure behind the cabin, its cedar frame pieced together with care and long hours. Silas kept his coat buttoned to the throat most days, his breath rising in clouds as he hammered shingles into place. Tessa worked beside him, hands red from cold, sawing lengths of twine and checking each joint for gaps. One morning she came out with a folded scrap of wool in her arms. "For your hands," she said, holding out the mitts. "I stitched them from an old shawl. There's a tear in one, but they'll hold through winter." Silas took them without speaking and slipped them on. They were too snug across the knuckles, but he flexed his fingers until the fabric gave a little. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know that." He nodded once and went back to work. But she noticed he didn't take them off. That evening she found him kneeling in the back corner of the barn, a brace of pine wedged in one hand, a chunk of metal in the other. He didn't hear her step close until she crouched beside him. "What's that?" "Trap iron," he said, not looking up. "Springs snapped, but I can rework it. Might catch a rabbit or two near the creek if the snow doesn't crust too deep." She ran a thumb along the edge. "Where'd you learn to mend traps?" "Traded chores for knowledge a long time back. Old man near the red butts taught me. Said if you can fix a snare, you'll never go hungry." She tilted her head. "He teach you anything else?" "Plenty. How to spot a bluff line by the tilt of the trees, where to find fat wood in wet weather, how to keep your fire low so it doesn't give away your camp." Tessa smiled faintly. "Sounds like he thought you'd be on the move forever." "He did," Silas said, voice low. "So did I." She didn't ask what had changed. She didn't need to. The next day brought wind, sharp and curling through the valley with the sound of dry leaves scraping across the cabin's eaves. Tessa stayed indoors to mend the curtain lining in the front room while Silas took the mare down to the creek to break ice and refill the trough. When he came back, he brought something wrapped in oilcloth, 3 small trout, their bellies silver blue and still twitching with cold. "Creek's thinning but not frozen through," he said, laying them on the table. "Used a willow line and a bent nail." She raised her brows. "You're full of surprises." He set about gutting them without a word, and she passed him a bowl of salt for packing the flesh. The room filled with the clean scent of river water and fish oil, a smell she hadn't known she missed. "I never asked where you were born," she said after a moment. "Panhandle of Texas," he replied. "Not much there but dust and mesquite. You ever go back?" "No." He scraped the blade across the spine of the second trout. "Place like that doesn't miss you when you leave. My people were gone by the time I could ride." She didn't press. Just said, "You've got a place here now." He looked up then, something unreadable in his expression. She didn't drop her gaze. After supper, she lit the second lamp and sat near the window with her ledger, tallying what remained of the grain sack and how long the root vegetables might last. Silas pulled a chair opposite her and rolled a fresh length of twine between his palms. "I can take the mare into town next week," he said. "Trade the pelts I cured for flour, maybe sugar if they've got it. It's a long ride." "I've done longer." She hesitated, then said, "The marshal in town." "He know you?" Silas met her eyes steady. "He does. I helped him settle a dispute last spring, two ranchers fighting over water rights. He vouched for me after." Tessa nodded. "All right." "You need anything else?" She considered, then said, "A length of flannel." "If there's any left, I'll find it." He rose and took her empty cup to the basin, rinsing it with the last of the warm water. She watched him, the quiet way he moved, how he always put things back where he found them. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He turned, drying his hands. "You mean after winter?" "I mean after you trade pelts, after the snow melts, after the smokehouse is full and the roof stops leaking." He stepped closer, not in a hurry. "I think about staying. I think about putting roots down. I think about you." Her breath caught, but she held steady. "What does that mean, Silas?" "It means I want to build more than fences and firewood. I want to build something that lasts, with you, if you'll have me." She stood, heart thudding. "You're not a man who says things just to say them." "No," he said. "I'm not." She stepped into him then, close enough to feel the heat rising off his coat, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then yes." He reached out, not fast, not unsure, and touched her cheek like he was asking permission before anything else. She leaned into his palm. Outside, wind swept across the ridge, but inside the cabin, everything held still. And in that stillness, two people who had once lived by silence found something they hadn't dared name before: a life beginning. Together. The day Silas rode into town, Tessa stayed by the loom in the front room, her shuttle moving in quiet rhythm as wind pressed against the window panes. She hadn't woven in months, not since before the harvest, but something about the stillness in the cabin made her hands want to build again. She worked pale wool through the warp, watching the pattern take shape. Simple, tight, strong. He returned the next afternoon, his coat stiff with frost and a wrapped bundle tied behind the saddle. She met him at the barn, pitchfork in hand, and took one look at his face before setting it aside. "Everything go smooth?" she asked. He dismounted with a slow nod. "Traded the pelts for flour, lard, and a length of blue flannel. Got us a sack of barley, too. Storekeeper was clearing his shelves before the next shipment." She reached for the bundle, but he kept hold of it. "There's something else," he said, voice quieter. "For you," she paused. "You traded for more." He stepped closer and unfolded a smaller parcel from his coat, revealing a book with a cracked leather cover. "Found it at the back of the dry goods store. Ledger says it's from Boston. Recipes and household instructions." Tessa blinked, one hand lifting to touch the edge of it. "You brought this here. You said once you never had time to learn proper preserves. Thought maybe this'd help." She took it carefully, the spine worn smooth by other hands. As she turned the first page, her throat tightened. "I haven't seen handwriting like this since school. It's beautiful." He smiled faintly, watching her fingers trace the ink. "Figured you'd know how to read it better than me." They carried the goods inside together. Silas set the barley near the stove while she placed the book with her ledger, careful not to let the pages catch the heat. That night, after the stew had cooled and the lamplight had softened the corners of the room, she opened the book again. Silas sat across from her, mending the leather strap on his saddlebag. "Did you ever think of marrying?" she asked without looking up. He didn't answer right away. She heard the leather creak beneath his hands. "Not before now," he said. "Didn't think I had the right kind of life for it." She turned another page. "And now, I think I want to build something that doesn't need riding away from. I think I want to wake up in the same place come spring, with the same person." She set the book down. "I've never worn a ring. I don't have one," he said. "Only what I carry in my hands, but if you want a church and a preacher, I'll find them." She stood, stepped around the table, and took his hand gently. "I don't want a preacher, I want you." He looked up at her, eyes steady and warm. Then that's settled. They didn't speak more of it that night. They didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, they fell into a rhythm as certain as the sun's slow path across the snowy ridge. Silas finished the smokehouse and hung the last of the venison to cure. Tessa spun wool by the hearth and stitched the flannel into a shirt that came out a little too short in the arms. "You'll outgrow my sewing," she said, laughing as he tried it on. "I'll never outgrow you," he answered. She didn't reply, just reached for his hand and held on. The snow deepened by late January, but the cabin stayed warm, the walls patched and the fire constant. On the first clear day in February, they walked out past the creek, boots crunching over frozen ground, and stood beneath a bare cottonwood with the sky wide open above them. Tessa took his hands in hers and spoke first. "I don't want promises pinned to paper. I want the kind you keep in small ways. Every day." Silas nodded. "Then I'll keep them with my hands, with my work, with the way I wake beside you." They stood silent for a while after that, the kind of silence that didn't leave room for doubt. And there, with the wind brushing past and the ground hard beneath them, they called it done. No church, no ring. Just two souls choosing to stay. When spring came, it came slowly. The creek ran louder, the ground softened, and the first shoots of green pushed through the thawed soil near the garden. Tessa planted carrots and onions. Silas repaired the yoke for the plow, carving their initials into the wood before setting it out to dry. By June, the cabin had new shutters and a second chair carved by Silas's hand sat beside the fire. He built a table narrow enough to fit against the wall, and she spread a linen cloth over it and placed the recipe book at its center. One morning, as the sun broke clean over the ridge, Tessa stepped outside with her hands on her belly, the faintest swell beneath her dress. Silas was splitting wood near the edge of the barn, and when he looked up, she nodded once. He dropped the axe. They didn't speak. He crossed to her, slow and sure, and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. She pressed her cheek to his chest, her fingers curling into the back of his shirt. "You ready for this?" she asked, voice quiet against his collarbone. His reply came without pause. "I've been ready since the day you let me stay." And that was the truth of it. They lived there in that valley through long summers and quiet winters. He taught their son to carve with care, and she taught him to read from the same recipe book Silas had brought home that first winter. They built shelves, raised chickens, and never once broke the rhythm they'd made with those first days beside the fire. Love for them didn't come with thunder or grand declarations. It came with steady hands, with mended fences, with a warm meal shared in silence. It came with choosing each other every day in all the small ways that mattered, and it lasted.